Imagine this. You stand in the heart of ancient Rome, the air heavy with the smell of the Tiber River. Crowds gather, murmuring, eyes fixed on a strange object resting on the cobblestone ground. A giant leather sack, stitched tight, bulging in uneven shapes. From inside, you can hear the scratching of claws, the hiss of scales, and the faint, desperate voice of a man begging for mercy. This was Poena, one of the most feared punishments in the Roman Empire, reserved for those who committed the most unforgivable crime, the murder of a parent. Romans believed this act was so unnatural, so against the laws of gods and men, that the punishment had to be equally unnatural. Death by simple execution wasn't enough. The criminal had to be erased in a way that shamed them forever, while terrifying everyone who watched. The ritual began with a formal trial. Roman judges sat in white togas, their faces as cold as marble. If the accused was found guilty of parricide, the killing of their father or mother, the sentence was delivered with chilling precision. You shall be sewn into a sack with live beasts and thrown into the river, so that you may have no place among the living, nor any burial among the dead. The executioners wasted no time. The condemned man was stripped of his clothes, symbolizing the loss of his honor and identity. His feet were bound, his hands tied, and then the animals were brought in, each chosen for symbolic and physical terror. A snake, representing betrayal and treachery, its body coiled and tense, ready to strike at the slightest movement. A dog, often half-starved to make it more aggressive, symbolizing loyalty corrupted into rage. A rooster, thrashing and clawing wildly, representing the dawn of death. A reminder that time was short. In some accounts, even a monkey was added, seen as a mocking reflection of human sinfulness. Screeching and biting without warning. The animals were forced into the sack first, their fear and fury mixing in a frenzy of sound. Then, the murderer was shoved in headfirst, knees bent, struggling against the inevitable. The smell of animal sweat and raw leather filled his lungs. The sack was pulled tight and sewn shut with heavy rope. From that moment on, he was no longer a man, just a shapeless bundle writhing in panic, about to vanish from the world. The crowd followed as the sack was dragged to the riverbank. The Roman soldiers lifted it high, ignoring the muffled screams and the snapping jaws from within. The water below moved slowly, like a dark mirror, reflecting the grim faces of the spectators. With one final heave, the sack splashed into the Tiber. Immediately, the animals thrashed in terror, clawing, biting, and striking at anything they touched. The man's screams turned to choking gasps as the cold water rushed in, through tiny gaps in the stitching. Inside that sack was chaos, the dog snapping at his face, the snake tightening around his limbs, the rooster's talons raking his skin. The water dragged the sack under. It bobbed up once, twice, then vanished completely. There would be no body to retrieve, no funeral rites to be performed. In Roman belief, this was worse than death itself. The soul would wander restless, never finding peace, denied both the land of the living and the realm of the dead. The crowd along the riverbank leaned forward, straining to see the struggling leather sack bobbing violently in the water. Some Romans cheered, others looked away, unable to watch the frantic movement inside. From within the sack came muffled screams, snarls, hissing, and frantic scratching, the combined chaos of man and beast in their shared death chamber. The dog, maddened by fear, bit at anything it could reach. The snake, disturbed by the violent thrashing, lashed out repeatedly, sinking its fangs into flesh, sometimes human, sometimes animal. The rooster's claws and beak struck wildly in the cramped darkness, and the human victim, gasping for breath, tried desperately to kick, twist, and find a pocket of air that wasn't filled with wet leather or fur. The executioners had tied the sack deliberately loose enough for the animals to move, but tight enough that every motion pressed them together. The sack rolled and spun as it drifted with the current, and the water seeped in. At first, the victim coughed and sputtered, but soon he was choking as the weight of the leather and the wet fur pressed against his face. Roman law prescribed no quick death here. Poena was a public moral theater. meant to erase a murderer's dignity entirely. In the Roman mind, killing your own family was not just a crime. It was a betrayal against the gods, society, and the sacred order of the household. So instead of a clean execution, the condemned was denied even the basic right to die alone. He would be surrounded by creatures that symbolized chaos, betrayal, and humiliation, and forced to die alongside them. Spectators sometimes claimed they could hear the different sounds inside the sack: a distinct bark, a desperate human shout, a hiss cutting through the air. The Roman moralists saw in this mix of noises a final, fitting disgrace. The killer's last breath mingled with the voices of beasts. As the current carried the sack downstream, it slowly sank lower and lower into the dark waters of the Tiber. For a few seconds, it would resurface, bulging and writhing, before dipping under again. Eventually, there was no more movement. The sack drifted limp, the leather soaked and heavy, sinking into the depths where the river would carry it away, erasing all trace of the condemned. This punishment was not just a gruesome spectacle. It was deeply symbolic in the Roman worldview. Each animal placed inside the sack carried a meaning. The dog represented loyalty twisted into treachery. Romans valued dogs as protectors of the home. But here, the loyalty was turned into violence against the condemned, mirroring the betrayal of the murderer against his own family. The snake symbolized cunning and danger, a silent killer that struck without warning, much like the act of murdering a loved one. The rooster was tied to the dawn and vigilance. Its presence reminded everyone that truth and judgment eventually come to light, no matter how much one tries to hide a crime. In earlier versions of the punishment, even a monkey was sometimes included. Romans saw monkeys as distorted, grotesque imitations of humans, a living reminder that the murderer had lost all claim to humanity. The act of sealing the victim with these animals was a ritual in itself. Roman executioners worked methodically, first binding the murderer's limbs, then introducing each animal in a specific order, as though performing a grim ceremony. The sack was sewn tight with heavy stitches to prevent any escape, and a final check was made to ensure the animals were still alive. Their fear was part of the sentence. For ordinary Romans, witnessing Poena Cullei was meant to be both a warning and a reassurance. It reminded them that Rome did not tolerate crimes that could tear apart the foundation of the family unit. In a society where the paterfamilias, the male head of the household, held near absolute authority, parricide, the killing of a father or close relative, was an unthinkable offense, one that demanded not only death but erasure from the human order. Roman writers like Cicero and Ulpian commented on the punishment in their works, often describing it as the most shameful fate possible. Death by sword or crucifixion might still leave a body intact for burial, but Poena Cullei left nothing for a proper funeral. The body was lost to the river, denied the rites that Romans believed were necessary for peace in the afterlife. In effect, the condemned was not just executed, they were erased. One of the most infamous accounts dates back to 81 BC. During the dictatorship of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a young man named Lucius Hostius was accused of murdering his father. During a dispute over inheritance, his defense claimed self-defense, but the court was unconvinced. He was sentenced to Poena Cullei, and according to chroniclers, the trial itself became a public sensation. On the day of his execution, the forum was packed. The crowd followed the procession to the river, where the sack, already bulging with the thrashing dog, rooster, and snake, waited on the dock. Hostius struggled violently as he was forced inside, cursing and shouting that he was innocent. His cries were swallowed by the roar of the crowd, some of whom mocked him, others calling for the gods to punish him more. When the sack hit the water, it rolled and spun, the dog snarling and the rooster screech echoing across the Tiber. Within minutes, it disappeared downstream. No one ever saw the body again. For Rome, the case was closed, both legally and spiritually. The sound of the crowd swelled, a sea of voices rising into the air like a chaotic storm. The arena was not the grand Colosseum this time. It was a smaller execution square, surrounded by stone buildings whose shadowy walls had seen countless deaths. Merchants abandoned their stalls, children clung to their mothers, and soldiers leaned casually against their spears, watching with the detached interest of men too familiar with violence. Lucius, bound tightly with coarse ropes, was dragged forward by two guards. His face was pale, but his eyes darted wildly, desperate for any glimpse of escape. None existed. His crimes were known, not just whispered, but proclaimed from the Senate steps, the murder of his own father. And in Rome, parricide was the most despised act of all. A deep, commanding voice broke through the noise. Citizens of Rome, witness justice as decreed by our laws, as our ancestors intended. The crowd's roar answered in approval. The executioner stepped forward, his arms thick as tree trunks, holding the strange instrument of death, a massive leather sack, stitched from the hides of cattle, reinforced with bronze clasps. At its bottom, the leather was worn from years of grim service. The smell hit Lucius instantly, the mingling scents of sweat, animal fur, and dry blood. And then came the animals. A soldier hauled forward a snarling dog, its teeth bared, straining against the rope around its neck. Its fur was matted, and its eyes glinted with madness, as if it somehow knew the purpose it was about to serve. Next was a rooster, flapping its wings violently, letting out a piercing, almost mocking crow. Its claws scratched at the executioner's arm as it was shoved toward the sack. The snake followed, a writhing, coiled menace taken from the marshes near the Tiber. Its scales gleamed under the sunlight, its forked tongue flicking rapidly. The soldiers held it at arm's length, careful to avoid its venomous bite. The crowd leaned forward, the air charged with a morbid anticipation. Lucius began to shout, his voice hoarse, pleading with the magistrate. I confess to what you wish, but let me face the sword. Let it be quick." But Rome's law was clear. A murderer of bloodkin was denied the dignity of a soldier's death. This was not only punishment, it was humiliation before the gods. Two soldiers forced Lucius to his knees. The leather sack was laid open on the ground, wide enough to swallow him whole. Inside, the animals were pushed in, the rooster first, flapping violently in the cramped darkness, then the snake, which immediately slithered to a corner, coiling in confusion. The dog was last, barking and snapping as the executioners shoved it inside. Lucius thrashed, but the soldiers were stronger. His legs were folded sharply, his arms pinned against his chest, and the stench of animal breath and leather enveloped him as the opening closed above his head. The stitching was fast, deliberate, sealing him into a nightmare. He could feel the rooster's frantic wings battering his face, the snake's scales gliding across his bare skin, and the dog's sharp claws tearing at his tunic. The sack was lifted, his muffled screams mixed with the shrieks and snarls of the trapped beasts. The sound was something the crowd would remember for years, a chorus of terror from both man and animal. Two men carried the writhing sack toward the riverbank. The Tiber's dark water lapped lazily against the shore, reflecting the pale afternoon light. A priest stood nearby, chanting a prayer to the gods as if to purify the act, though in truth, the gods needed no convincing. To Rome, this was justice in its purest form. The magistrate raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. For the crime of murdering your own blood, you are denied the earth's soil. The river shall claim you, and the beasts shall be your witnesses in death. With a nod, the men heaved the sack into the air and let it drop into the river with a heavy splash. At first, the leather bulged and shifted violently, as if alive in every inch. The trapped animals, now in panic, attacked anything they could reach, beak, fang, and claw, tearing in the pitch black. The snake's hiss cut through the muffled chaos. Lucius's muffled cries turned into choking gasps as the water began to seep through the seams. The sack rocked on the surface for a few seconds, then began to sink. The river swallowed it slowly, almost deliberately, as if savoring the moment. The last visible bulge beneath the leather disappeared into the murk-dotted silence. Only the Tiber's gentle ripples remained. The crowd exhaled as one. To them, the sentence had been carried out and balance restored. The family's honor, tainted by the crime, was washed away with the body. The animals, now lifeless within the sack, were part of the curse, their spirits bound to the punishment as eternal reminders of the law as cruelty. The punishment's horror lay not only in its violence, but in its symbolism. Each animal carried a meaning in Roman superstition. The dog symbolized loyalty, twisted here into a savage mockery, turning on the condemned. The rooster represented vigilance and dawn. But inside the sack, it became a herald of doom. The snake was a creature of deceit and hidden danger, mirroring the betrayal of a murderer's own kin. By trapping these creatures with a killer, the Romans believed the criminal's soul would be denied peace, tossed into the afterlife with chaos as companions. This was not an everyday sentence. Poena Cullei was reserved for the most despised criminals in Roman law, parricides, and was meant to horrify even those hardened by Rome's countless other brutal executions. Years later, those who had witnessed Lucius's execution still spoke of it. Children who had clung to their mothers the day would recount the thrashing sack in hushed tones. To their own children, the executioner, when asked, would only say that the worst part was not the screaming, but the silence after the sack sank. When the river seemed to hold its breath, Poena Cullei eventually disappeared from legal practice as Rome's systems evolved, but the memory of it lingered, preserved in scrolls, whispered in forums, and etched into the darker corners of history. It was a reminder that justice in Rome was not just about punishment. It was about making the punishment unforgettable. And in that, Poena Cullei succeeded more than most.